How do you turn Sephiroth's one-winged angel from this to this? You ask this guy. Julian is the co-founder of video game jazz band The Consouls, who specialize in funk and jazz arrangements of the most well-known tracks from your favorite games. From KK Cruisin' to Ryu's theme, they've inspired and entertained hundreds of thousands of people through their YouTube channel, live radio shows, and tours across the globe. Julian has also worked as a composer on numerous games, producing original tracks for Bits Bops, Kana, and Boomerang Fu. Outside of games, he's also worked in animation and musically contributed to the hit Cartoon Network TV show Steven Universe, playing alongside Rebecca Sugar, Estelle, and Chance the Rapper. So how do you make a killer video game soundtrack? Well, let's ask Julian.
Welcome to the 20M Podcast, the show about disagreeing with your friends and anime and gaming and basically any kind of entertainment. My name is Rino. We have our usual co-host here, Arif. Arif, say hello.
Hello. Why did you delegate me to say hello?
I just wanted you to have to introduce yourself, have a space to say hi.
Hello, everybody. My name is Arif. Thanks so much for listening to the 20M Podcast. This is my co-host, Rino.
Hello. How is everyone doing?
Obviously, but I didn't ask you to say hello.
I'm just going to do it anyway. Whatever. And more importantly than either of us, today we have a very special guest. We have Zorsy, aka Julian. How you doing?
Hello. I'm very good.
Hello.
Thank you both for having me on the podcast. Looking forward to it.
Yes.
Oh,
yes,
yeah,
indeed.
that's it. That was the end. Yeah,
That was the end.
Sorry.
All right. Well, I'll do the hype reel then, right? So as for those of you who are listening, watching, who don't know, Julian is a video game composer. He's composed some really amazing games that we're going to get into. He's also part of a video game jazz band, The Consouls, which we're also going to get into. You've just done a whole bunch of stuff in the games sort of space, right? Like you've been around for quite a while, haven't you?
It's an indication of my life. I like games. I like music. And that's what I've dedicated, a lot of my time into. But yes, correct.
Yeah. And I think Arif and I are super excited because we're also like big VGM fans. I don't know how you can't be. Like if you spend an X amount of time playing video games, surely you notice the music and then you start to fall in love with the music. And I think, most gamers kind of just end up, being really fascinated by that part of it. So
my biggest gripe in like video games, just to jump in there, is like I really it's mind-boggling to me when people discredit video game music. And obviously this is like you hear this so much from video game fans, but every single time I'm like, if people don't know about video game music, just listen to Yoko Shimomura's stuff. You know what I mean? You will cry within the first like 10 minutes of listening to her music. So that's my gripe. Like the hill I'm gonna die on today, just profusely talking about how beautiful Yoko Shimomura's music is.
Well, I have like a really interesting question for both of you. And it's like, when did you first notice music in video games? Because I have my own story as well. But like, most likely we start playing games as a kid. But like, so as a child, like when do you first be like, hey, I kind of like that sound, Like, do you have that moment?
I think it was like before... Oh, sorry, I interjected by going first, but sorry.
Go for it.
It's almost like you're the guest here. I think that is totally good.
True.
No one cares what Arif thinks. It's
Yeah.
I think for me, there was like the association because my brother was playing games by the time I could remember anything. So like the first game he was playing a lot was Chrono Trigger. And I distinctly remember the sounds of it because, back then in the 90s, like compared to other popular commercial music, you'd always have a really unique soundscape of things that's kind of part of like the Nintendo, the 8-bit, 16-bit era. And I wouldn't necessarily say I thought that I enjoyed it, but like every time I heard a particular sound, I was like, oh, we're in like 680, or like I knew straight away like the time or the setting we were at, so that eventually when I was a teenager and played the game itself, like, or even when I heard the soundtrack just stand alone, I heard the music and I was like, oh my gosh, I remember this as like a 5-year-old. And like, I think it wasn't the association of just the video game being enjoyable, but my memories of my childhood of like, let's say my brother playing it, right? And that was kind of the start of realizing that this was attached to a lot of my upbringing. So I think there was upbringing first, and as I fell in love with music down the line, then that also drew my attention to other titles that like I ended up liking certain games just because of the music alone. But Chrono Trigger is probably one of my top soundtracks of all time. Yeah.
Amazing.
I'll echo this Chrono Trigger one because I don't know who else. I was having a conversation yesterday, funny enough, about Chrono Trigger and Chrono Cross, and I was bringing up a bit about how the thing about Chrono Trigger is that I think you nailed it, right, Julian? You can imagine the moments in that game according to the music. And I remember playing through the game for the first time, and I played it very late. I played it like 5-6 years ago or so. You know what I mean? So Chrono Trigger is very recent in my memory, but I remember playing and seeing the landscapes, and it's like the music is just so incredibly aligned with what you're seeing visually compared to other games, you know, where maybe the music might be beautiful and amazing, but you know, it's not as reminiscent of what you're seeing on screen. But yeah, Chrono Trigger is that perfect mix. So I'll definitely echo that. Also, the opening, even the opening, not cutscene, the menu for Chrono Trigger, how iconic is that music as well, right?
And I would hear that every day, irrespective of where my brother was in the plot, right? It's like, but it was so good because sometimes he'd go and like make Megarang and something, and the menus just going, and I'm just like, I remember this. Like,
it's like your lullaby instead of like Mary Had a Little Lamb. It was Chrono Trigger menu.
What nerds we are, you know what I mean? Also, I want to go back to that, right? Because there was what a great name for a podcast that would be, Me Goreng and Chrono Trigger. Like we should have renamed this podcast to Me Goreng. And for those that don't, Me Goreng is fried noodles. Is that how we translate that? Right? Yes.
Noodle fried.
Noodle fried. Yeah.
Noodle fried. Yeah.
What's your story though, Rita? Because you said you had one.
Oh yeah. I mean, mine was just funnily enough, it was Tekken 3. Which is not normally, it's not a cinematic game, and it's not like a JRPG that you normally fall in love with. But I just remember like playing all the levels, and then the levels had really nice music, and I really liked like Forest Law's theme. And then I would play it, and then it would be like, well, I kind of have to play the game, and then the music ends in like 30 seconds or less and all. But then I think it's if you unlock every character story, you get the movie and the jukebox. And the jukebox is where you can just play the level music. And so my dad one day walked in, and my PlayStation was on, and I was like using like the bed to do my homework, and then the music, it was just a jukebox running, and he was like, "What are you doing? Like, aren't you like, are you playing the game or are you doing your homework?" And I'm like, "I'm just listening to music." Like, it was just such a weird thing for him to have seen. But yeah, I love it. And then yesterday when we met up with friends, one of my rants was that they took off all the Tekken music from Spotify.
Oh,
I think this was like 2 years ago. They brought it on, and I was like super happy because it was like my workout music. And then they took it off, I think 1 or 2 years ago. I was like, oh, this is terrible. Yeah.
That is heartbreaking, to be honest with you. My deepest condolences.
R.I.P. What about yourself?
No, absolutely.
I know. That's why I'm just moving on. I'm just moving on. Tekken music Tekken 5 is good as well. I think it's the track called Moonlit Wilderness is very good.
That sounds like a good track, actually. I don't know. I don't think I have too much of a story. I think similar to Julian, I think it was like it was in that Square Soft-ish era. I mean, like Kingdom Hearts was the one for me, right? Where I remember after playing Kingdom Hearts and after like telling people about the music, I would be like, "Oh, so what are some of the like songs that you like in your favorite video games?" And then they would show me, and I'm like, "This is so trash compared to Kingdom Hearts." I was like, I guess I was so spoiled because like genuinely like, and I can get into this later about like, you know, seeing the Kingdom Hearts concerts and things like that, or like, you know, Final Fantasy Distant Worlds or whatever. But that like the music is genuinely moving, and it completely transports me to like playing Kingdom Hearts 1 or Kingdom Hearts 2 for the first time, right? So Kingdom Hearts was that. But I think prior to that, when I noticed music, it was Pokemon, like Pokemon Red, Pokemon Blue. Like the music going from town to town.
Oh yeah,
it
really sets the scene, right?
It really sets the scene. It's so iconic. And I remember to the point where like I would play the Game Boy in the car and I would put the volume on. And I can't imagine those things are that loud now that I think about it, right? But I remember my dad would get so frustrated because all he would hear whilst driving, you know what I mean? Which is like these 8-bit sounds that like are bopping throughout the keys or whatever. But I think Pokemon was.
Did everyone turn down the volume to 0 when you go into Lavender Town because it's scary?
I embrace the darkness, actually. Like I will.
I always turned it down. It really scared me. Do you have it in your head? Everyone's like thinking. Oh my
Yeah.
God, yeah.
You nailed it. You know what's super funny? I want to like, this is a quick side note. The first ever podcast that we did, if I'm not mistaken, on the 20M, is it the first or second, Reno? But we recreated the Lavender. Like I'm gonna clip this out in some way, shape, or form. But we tried to do acapella Lavender Town.
I don't. I think I must have like burned that from my memory. I don't have any recollection of
It's
that
on
whatsoever.
YouTube. It is on YouTube. Anyway,
But,
It's like the '90s version of like the Squid Game thing.
Yeah. Oh my god. Oh my god. So
Like,
true.
You know,
Yeah.
everyone, yeah.
it was like Lavender Town walked so that Squid Game could run or something like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But like, wait. Let's go back a couple of steps. So video game music. When did you decide to pursue it as a career, or like how did that happen?
Good question. I never, even with music in general, I don't think I really wanted to pursue it initially as a career. It was just something that like happened by chance. But I knew one of the things I wanted to do in life is like I would love to make music for a video game. And I know I've kind of like done some of that now, but I really think like a JRPG would be, you know, that's what kind of got me into music. That's a genre of music that makes me feel a lot of emotions because of association with you know, nostalgia and characters and blah 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 blah. So it was always one of those things where like as a teenager playing a lot of these JRPGs, because I also grew up with Kingdom Hearts, is like,
Oh my god,
I
this
want
is
to
the fourth episode in a row we're talking about Kingdom Hearts, and I'm so excited.
No, that's
Continue.
enough. That's enough. It's gonna be a banned word. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Sorry. Kingdom Hearts. Yeah.
Yeah, so anyway, Kingdom Hearts. When I was playing a lot of these games in my teens, yeah, I really wanted to. I started. That's what got me back into playing piano, because I played piano up until like 8 or 9. I didn't really like how it was being taught. You know, it was like, no, I'm not gonna flame who was teaching me, but I just I didn't
Drag him, come on! Like,
yeah. It was my godfather.
yeah.
No, I didn't really enjoy classical music at the time because I thought, like, you know, you mentioned Mary Had a Little Lamb. I was learning stuff that I didn't really care about, you know?
Mhm.
And it wasn't until I discovered, like, on YouTube, I think there was, like, blindfolded pianist, Martin Lung. He, like, played Mario on the piano, and I was like, wait, what? You can play, like, like, Mario and stuff on the piano, and...
I wish we could hear that. We heard a very faint version of that.
Oh, damn. Okay, that's right. We'll just dub it in later.
Well, I didn't
Yeah,
know.
we'll do it.
Yeah.
But I was just like, I didn't realize you could play not classical music on the piano. Wild, you know? So
Yeah.
first, it got me inspired to just learn how to play Kingdom Hearts music, Final Fantasy music on piano. And there was a lot of really good, like, Square Enix soft, you know, the whatever line is. They released a lot of official piano collections, and a lot of those arrangements were actually really good at developing as a like piano player or a musician. And that kind of inspired me to make my own arrangements. And down the line, it's like, man, I would love to contribute to a game. I want to make someone cry in the best way, you know?
Yeah.
So I think as a teenager, I wanted to get into the VGM space, but I wasn't sure if I wanted it to become my full-time career, you know? So, but here we are. Yeah.
I'll walk down memory lane a little bit there, because I think you kind of nailed it. I remember going to Kinokuniya as a kid as well, and then going to the music section of Kinokuniya, the bookstore, right? And I would be whisked away by just seeing like Final Fantasy music, like, you know, collections and sheet music or whatever, and then just looking at the price and be like, wow, that's really expensive, and I'm also not that good at piano, so like I don't know if this is a good purchase or not, you know what I mean? But I do agree. I love how you can always find arrangements for usually, I guess, like JRPGs, but a lot of Square stuff as well, even when I was growing up.
I feel a little guilty because like I didn't see any of the sheet music in stores because they didn't publish it in Australia, right? But so my only expense was calling my parents to buy ink and going on the internet to search
Yep.
piano collections.
Oh yeah, I'm well aware. Yeah.
Yeah. So we got there. But
I think that's such a cool, like, because I think most of us as Asian kids, right? Most of us grew up having to play the piano from like a young age, and like whoever stuck with it till the end is like the survivor, right? So I definitely pulled out pretty early, around 8 or 9. But the friends I knew who did make it through, so the ones like when you're at a young age, you're like, haha, you have piano class, I get to play. Then by the time you get to high school, they're so cool because they can play all the songs you want them to play. They can play your video game music. They can play like the Disney songs. I remember like my friend was playing like, you know, all the like K-drama stuff as well, like River Flows in You and all those like sort of like Asian instrumentals, and it's like, damn, like that the payoff was good. It was like when they got to the point where they'd stuck it out enough, then they could impress people. I was like, wow, I wish I did that. They became cool.
That's like the biggest party trick, honestly, because we just got a piano. Funny enough, we just got a piano in this house like a couple days ago, and me and the housemates have been relearning how to play piano because most of us play piano, but like it's just we forgot. And I feel like now we're gonna host stuff at the place just for us to play piano. Not that it's gonna be good piano, but it is like, you know, the coolest thing to like. Do you just a very odd question here, Julian? Whenever you see a piano in a room, do you just walk up to it and just I'm gonna shred some Final Fantasy right now?
Hell no. I'm actually quite an introvert, and I get pretty uncomfortable with like I will never opt for it myself, and even if there's people around me that know I play piano and they're like, oh, like they'll egg me on. It's like, oh, you should play something. It's like, no. But if ever I get to a point where I feel comfortable enough to like play something, if I'm already lost in the music, then it's game over. I just don't stop because it's like, it's me and the music. I don't care what anyone around me is thinking, right? But I think those interactions happened a lot when I was around circles of friends that maybe were not, for example, not musicians themselves, or were not accustomed to having many musician friends, because it's like, oh my God, there's this thing that this guy can do. Do the thing, right? These days, like I would say, majority of my local friends in Sydney are musicians. So yeah, you know, we see piano and it's almost this mutual communication thing. If like we want to play something together, that's sweet, right? But I like long gone are the party trick days of the teens, right? Of like jamming River Flows in You and like oh, maybe that girl will know. Oh, the guys are here. Oh, they like that. So yeah, you know.
Can we talk a bit about, I mean, we've covered kind of like your VGM career, but then like now you've got this other thing, which is like the jazz component as well. Like, where did that idea come from? Because I know like you're like one of the founding members of the Consouls. So how did the idea of combining video game music with jazz as a genre come about?
Yeah, so like VGM is definitely the first thing that got me back into loving music, but I also grew up listening to things like R&B and hip hop, and I never really learned how to play that music on the piano. But as I was going through the end of high school, you know, like the school was saying, oh, you should, you know, maybe join the big band, or you should join like these other jazz ensembles, and I knew nothing of what was going on. But towards the end of high school, I kind of grew in love with it and wanted to like discover the genre of jazz a bit more. That like first year uni, second year uni, I was like, playing a few jazz things, trying to do what a jazz player can as a classical player. If anyone's seen Sakamichi no Apollon, it's the best representation of the Kids on the Slope. It's the best representation of how my upbringing was, because I didn't know what I was doing. But eventually, a couple of the other founding members, Tim on the sax, Anthony on guitar, they had booked me to play some form of like corporate gig, and we were playing like jazz music. But I found out that all of them were massive gamers, so in between rehearsals we go play games. And at the time I had a YouTube channel. I had a YouTube channel where I did a little bit of tried to do some jazz arrangements, and I told them, I was like, hey, I've actually got like a couple of like Nintendo arrangements if you want to play. And it's like, oh my God, Nintendo and jazz, that'd be so good. And then all the like the, you know, beta names of the band, like the Super Jazz Bro, like all these. My favorite one was like my music teacher at the time was like, oh, that's not what I intended on, like, it's just all these like really bad like puns. There's like these dad jokes, right? And honestly, like it started with just jamming, and then the band put a couple of these covers on YouTube, and it got to the point where eventually we met Gamera, the bass player, and oh, okay, we have a band. I'm not really doing anything on my own as a YouTube. Maybe we'll just start a YouTube channel because like
Mhm.
sounds like these guys want to play a few more things. How crazy. And yeah, that was kind of the birth of it. And then we just did a couple of like conventions around Sydney, and then all of a sudden 9 years or so later is kind of this like big part of our lives. So yeah,
Mhm.
that's kind of how it started.
I think that's so insane because I remember the overlap between music and video games is obviously something that we've already talked about, right? But I remember, even not to say that I'm like a great musician, right? But I remember when I would be jamming with my friends growing up, it would the you know we play some punk rock, and I love punk rock, so that'd be great. But I remember one time my friend was like, "Hey, I can play the Halo theme on the piano. Do you want to see if we can riff off of this?" I'm like, "Yes, that'd be so cool, right?" So then
Yeah.
we would try to experiment, and then it's always it's almost like a breath of fresh air, or it's kind of like a bigger pick me up where it's like you can play video game music because of
Mm.
how, I guess, like intimate video games are for a lot of us, right? So the fact that
Mhm.
you guys were able to, like, I guess, like put that collective together and kind of just run with it is just, it's beautiful to me, right? Because I can
Mm.
imagine it's fun, unless because I've also seen the stuff that you all do. It seems incredibly technical and complicated. You guys really bring like your A game with your compositions, right? But what is the ratio between like hard, like challenging to fun, whenever
Ooh.
you're playing a piece?
Yeah, to be honest, that is always subject to our time as a, dare I say, business, right? Like, because I think we try to balance quite a lot of things, and then whenever it's free time, and or sometimes it even just takes like, because majority of what the consoles do are arrangements of existing video games
Mhm.
tracks, right? So sometimes if the source material is already like cooked in the first place, example like sorry, Reno, we're gonna go back to Kingdom Hearts, but
Oh my god.
like we were like, oh, we really want to do Hollow Bastion. And it's like
Oh my
Mm.
god.
there's no way to make this sound like nice and ballady, right? You're not gonna go to Hollow Bastion in an elevator, right? So um the minute we heard that, it was like one of those like, oh, we definitely need to do this, and it was gonna be cooked from the beginning. That's on one side, and then on the other side, I think the band started off as like, you mentioned the word challenge, but in my mind that was kind of what I really wanted to set out, is like, because there's been so many like 10, 15 years ago, there would have been like many comments or people saying like, oh, there's no way you can make like Sephiroth's theme jazz, it'll never work, or like, so I always wanted to be the, you don't need to enjoy our music, but if I can make you question your beliefs on it, that's like
Mhm.
good enough for
That's
me.
amazing.
Did you
So
did you
so
take a look at my show notes, Julian? Because I literally
Or like
like,
One Wing
you can
Angel.
attest to this. Like, I have a section where I said like I want to bring up Hollow Bastion and I want to bring up One Winged Angel. Like, those are the two notes that because when I heard you, I think it was the guitarist that you had, right? And you doing the solos on, not the solos, just the main riff of Hollow Bastion, which is a very
mhm,
non-jazzy riff, right? It's a
mhm,
very non-jazzy like segment. The fact that you were able to make it jazz or jazz oriented was mind boggling to me, you know? And then same thing with One Wing Agent. I was like, I remember listening to the Hollow Bastion video, and then I remember I was like, there's no way that the consoles have done One Winged Angel. There's no way you
mhm,
can make that one jazzy. And then I looked
Mm.
it up, and then you did. I think there was a live stream that you did that you made it at least like a little jumpy, a little bit
Mhm.
more jazz. And
mm,
I was like,
mm.
there's no way you can pull this off, and you did. And I was like, this is hilarious.
Thank you. Yeah, it's like, I think of course many songs don't naturally translate to the genre, but I think what's kind of important is like, as you study the genre of, let's, jazz and friends and stuff, you kind of realize a lot of the tropes. Just so things like, there might be a lot of improv, it could be a lot of harmony that's really colorful, it could be swing, right? And a lot of those things will require, like, on a musical point, to like alter fragments of what you recognize, alter the melody. But if the melody is at least recognizable, and you've done slight alterations to make that fit in a setting, like, man, you can put any song in any genre, but I think a lot of the people who may argue that no, it doesn't work, are those who may essentially prefer the vibe and like if you're hearing, I called it one swinged angel, but if you play if you play one swung angel, right, you're not gonna get the same badassery, right? It's just not gonna be like Sephiroth at Costa del Sol, like having a cocktail. It's not. So by that merit, sure, you probably cannot make a badass swinged final boss theme, but like it's still the identifiable theme that you recognize, and I think a lot of where our more ambitious arrangements are intended to like flip the original song, so that's why I love doing boss battle things, because like, oh, you can't make this into something bossa or relaxing or samba or whatever the style is. I personally, as an arranger, I get really drawn to that idea.
I think what I really like about the music you guys make with the consoles is that it opens up people to a lot of different types of music that they wouldn't have heard before. So like, I'll be the first to admit, I didn't grow up with Zelda, so I have not played any of the Zelda games. But Lost Woods from Ocarina of Time, like the Consouls arrangement, is like one of my favorites of all time. It's like probably one of my most played on Spotify. And then there was one gig where you guys were playing in Sydney and my mom was in town, and I was like, Mom, I'm going to go to this gig. Like, you can come if you want. So I brought my mom, and she really, really liked, what was it called? A Village Swaying in the Wind. She was like so moved. She was like, oh my God, this is amazing. And I was like, Mom, it's from a game called Monster Hunter. And she's like, what? She's like, something so beautiful came from a game called Monster Hunter. I was like, yes, exactly. So like she was just so amazed, because my mom does love a lot of jazz, and she didn't, for her it was like, wow, so these are actually from video games. I'm like, yes, Mom. So I think that's amazing, like the way that you arrange it, and it can be so, not palatable, but like just so pleasing to people who wouldn't normally be part of this genre.
I also had a eureka moment with my mom, in the sense that like like when I was learning classical piano, in amongst that I'd be playing third time today, Kingdom Hearts Piano Collections music, right? And then I'd be like playing some of that, and my mom was like, oh, Julian, I love that Chopin song. It's like, ha, it's not Yoko Shimomura. Boom. And then like, the misconception of like video game music being blip 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 blip, there's so much beautiful music that's come out of video games, and it spans such a wide diversity of genres within it. Like, you can't really define, I don't know, if you define video game music, the only thing you could say is like, it's in a video game, but like nearly all aspects of music genres exist in video games. So it's still being pushed, that it's now being celebrated as its own thing too. So it's really exciting.
There should be I've just crafted a game show in my mind where it would be like, is it Chopin or is it Final Fantasy? And like, you go through each track and just like snippets of track. It's like, I can't tell if that's classical music or if that's just the boss fight in Final Fantasy 15. I don't know if that's like out there yet, but what's up, Julian?
Oh no!
I see the brain taking here. Are you gonna join the show with me? Like, should we start another YouTube channel where we just do this?
Well, we might have a competitor already. I have a couple of friends in Australia that start this like Twitch game channel called, like, it's the Chaser. Like, there's that game show called The Chaser. Yeah, they essentially do that same thing but for video game music. So there's someone who's like the Twitch chat will have to guess what the thing is, and then the Chaser has to guess as well, and it's a competition between the Twitch chat and the champion, so
that's super cool.
But comparing it to actual, I love those kind of comparisons to
forget 20M, forget the consoles. Let's start this up. But to your other point, it's like talking about the array of music in video games or video game adjacent music. It's like, I remember listening to Anamanaguchi from quite a while back, right? And then a lot of people would be like, obviously that is so aligned with what people think of video game music. But the fact that you can have like Anamanaguchi play shows that are sold out and like people love and revere them, and it is very like, I don't even know how you would describe that kind of music, right? Like very 8-bit kind of like old
chiptune,
yeah. chiptune.
Yeah.
But then you can go to a Distant Worlds concert, and then it'll be just like almost as if like they're playing at the Esplanade here, for example, right? The like you said, I think it's so hard to put it in a box, right? But I think the fact that you guys were able to do jazz is just as kind of like a focal point to your music is also another one of those things where, of course, jazz works. But my question here is like, are there inherently jazz tracks and video games that you play that are, I guess, like, are the majority of the tracks that you play like jazz oriented, or is it a challenge for you guys to be like, let's take the most non-jazzy track and let's make it jazz? Like, is that the whole point of the consoles?
Yeah, it's definitely more the latter. And there's many situations where we try to avoid the thing that's like already been done, so like there aren't many Mario things, for example, that we've gravitated towards, unless like on the flip side, the other end is, okay, maybe we just want to play the song because we like the song, right? There's so many like Mario Kart bangers that like we just want to play it. We don't care if it's a like 1-for-1 cover. We just have fun doing it, right? But definitely it's fun because I think we have a system with like our patrons where each month they will vote like songs that they want to hear from us, and it might be themed. So like the next one will be doing like, I think the next theme is called Waterworks, right? So you can interpret that as any sea theme.
Oh, that's awesome.
Right? Or you can interpret that as any emotional sad thing too, right? So you can imagine a lot of these sad things, if they're written for orchestra, sure, there might be a lot of challenges there, right? But if anything's got like a strong sounding melody, or which most iconic video game songs will in the first place, that definitely can be warped into the elevator or whatever genre we end up doing. So yeah,
elevator genre.
that's the pitch for consoles.
Yeah, because we lift you up.
You've thought of this.
Oh my god. I wanted to ask, because I know in the past I've been like, yo, you guys should do like anime music, and you're like, no, we're Consouls, so we only do games. But I was going through your YouTube channel earlier, and I saw you guys did Bluebird, the Naruto opening. That was very cool. Like that is also something I didn't expect to be jazzified.
I mean,
is that a question just to be like, I just want to prove you wrong that you should be doing anime music?
No. I was just no. It's another question about like how like surprising it is. It's like I'm guessing Arif has no idea what I'm talking about because he doesn't watch anime. But if you know Bluebird, you'll be like, wow, like never expected this to be played jazz wise.
Yeah. I mean, to step back a bit, I think we are pretty open to doing a lot more anime now. So now's the best time, Rino, to like flood
to get my request in on Patreon.
Yeah, that's a Patreon plug actually. So like 100%. We shall talk after the paywall. Now, what was the question? Yeah, I mean, like definitely this year we're pretty due to do an anime something soon, but we're also trying to get into originals as well, because that kind of like, I know I've done a couple of things for video games already, but I think even as a band, the Consouls would love to be involved in like any form of working with a video game, whether it's part of the official soundtrack or pitching any form of a jazz soundtrack or something. Like Square releases all these very like compilation albums, like the acoustic album, like the acoustic Final Fantasy, or like the jazz blah blah blah. Like there's so many different compilations that they've acquired over the years that would be something cool that we'd love to be a part of as well. And I think originals is definitely a starting point to be like, hey, we're not just the cover band on YouTube that play your favorite tracks. We also want to work in games. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm guessing like it's a lot more fulfilling and creatively sort of inspiring to be able to work on your own stuff and to be able to kind of stake a claim for your own, as opposed to just covering something else.
100%. Yeah, like I think we've finally got a system for how, like, of being able to be in this wonderful studio. Shout out to Messiah Studios, and just to have the facility, to have the resources to like record and track and stuff. But I know it's a long-term goal for the band to be yeah,
Mm-hmm.
get that extra, the soul part of consoles, right? Fulfill that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, whilst we're sticking on the consoles here, because I know we want to touch on a little bit about
Your
your work,
personal look.
yeah, with video games and whatnot, right? But I was listening to one of the tracks where you had, I think, a collaboration with a string quartet in your track. So to me, when you talk about like you're just covering a band that just covers video game music, it's almost as if you're way more than that, because it seems like you guys are going really hard in terms of the pieces that you do and arrange and compose. So I guess, like, what can you walk me through a little bit of like what that process is in terms of like, okay, this time we're going to go crazy with this solo, or this time we need to highlight a string section of the song? Because I know you said it's a time thing, right? But as somebody who composes, as somebody who, it sounds like you all are phenomenal musicians, right? As people who want to do more creative work with, I guess, source material that's not originally yours, what is that process like in terms of like going hard or exploring all these creative avenues in one video?
Sure. I think, okay, so there's always like, if I talk on the back end first, that'll open its way for the big stuff, right? Like, of course, like we have like a video every week or every fortnight. We do these monthly streams, and if we're pretty on top of things with recordings for what our YouTube channel would look like in the next 4 or 5 months, then that kind of paves the way for us to be like, both from a time point of view and a budget point of view, it's like, all right, what's the next big thing? What's like, who of our friends can we rope in, right? Because a lot of, sometimes going back to one of our earlier topics before, we hear a piece, is like, oh my God, like the inspiration hits us straight away. It's like, this would sound so sick with a string quartet. Oh, this would sound so sick with a big band, right? And that's always the, like, we'll have our like a AGM, our monthly meeting or whatever of like, post reflections, but I'm always looking forward to like, all right, so what's next? I was like, okay. And by the time like we've made a decision, so for now, I guess talking about the strings one, we had worked closely with one of the members of the string quartet. Her name is Pitan, who also does video game covers, but she's been pretty integral in our like workflow for a couple of covers. So we always knew that she had a few of her close friends that she's done recordings with. And for like one of our end of year things, we're like, oh my gosh, why don't we try and find a way to make a JRPG cross strings like concert or like live stream, right? And of course, without the time, like, arranging for that will take 2, 3, 4 times as much work as it is for any of our regular stuff, right? But it like, if we plan a lot of things in advance, there's always, we have a fresh, balanced, creative mind, right? To look at a track and be like, oh my God, this track from Kingdom Hearts or like Final Fantasy will be, like this would be perfect to do like with a string quartet. And then that allows us time to, between members of the band or even members of the strings, to like show ideas and be like, hey, will this work? Because then it becomes a lot more collaborative instead of trying to like, because sometimes some songs end up getting the elevator treatment, or like, we don't have enough time to give every song as equal love. And, that's just the reality of it. But sometimes, we have to like operate like a workhorse. So at the time of this recording, we're a little ahead, but we're not too far in front that like, we do have time to do some arrangements, but they may not be our most ambitious endeavors yet, right? Sometimes we might like play the game and notice, oh, this particular game has got a release coming at this part of the year, so maybe we can in advance like try and record some things from XYZ. Maybe that's a hint on what may come out on the channel soon, right? But I definitely like, once we've balanced that, then it's always that, yeah, like, okay, then our mindsets shift to purely being creative, and then we can like share ideas between members of the band. It's like, hey, will this work, right? And often like we might have like buffed looking skeletons of the arrangements of like, this is our idea for it, but sometimes things can take a 180, or they go even way forward by the time that we're in the room trying to play the music, right? Because sometimes it's like, oh, okay, this song might start off as this, and then we play as like someone, Jono, Gamera, whatever. They'd be like, oh, you know what would be sick? A string quartet. I was like, all right,
Just get them on speed dial right now.
yeah. Where's that 5,000? Okay, cool, or whatever. You know, like then we deal with those other logistical issues later, right? Because if we're really psyched on something, then it'll come into fruition for sure.
I feel like the biggest takeaway from that is like the secret sauce of the Consouls is like project management. It's like planning in advance is like what allows us to be creative, like which is such a great takeaway for, you know, a lot of aspiring people, musicians who want to make it big on YouTube or whatever. It's like, sure, like creativity is a big part of it, and I'm sure it's like when the meeting of the minds comes, like explodes and it's like rainbows and butterflies, but a lot of it is like treating it as a business and taking it very seriously as well, right? And like making sure you've got things planned, you've got, you know, deadlines to adhere to because your patrons are waiting for this stuff. And if you want to get like good quality musicians, you got to book them in advance and things like that. Like, I think it's sort of like a great learning.
And I mean, like it wasn't really a system. Even until now, there's many things that are not optimized, but these are kind of things that we learned where I think for a lot of us, it's not like one day we decided today we are going to treat it like a business, right? It's like we ended up doing things that contributed to the business's growth, right? And over time, it's like, maybe it's a good idea we do meetings. Maybe it's a good idea we have someone that's in charge of this, right? It just allowed, like you said, it allowed us to be more creative in the end. And I think that's probably one of the big goals, like, right? Like any business would love to have freedom of like, you know, to output, well, at least in a creative space, to output what they want to show, right? And not just become a, well, yeah, like I say, a workhorse for clientele. I think shifting the balance is always one of the biggest challenges for us, right? Of like making sure we're properly looking after our patrons and, you know, delivering to them, but also keeping it enjoyable and creative for us as well. So hopefully the original avenue will meet those needs as well.
All right, like I definitely want to like kind of get into some of your own personal work as well, and I know Arif has lots of questions about some of the stuff you've been working on. So most notably, I think like you were part of the Steven Universe, sort of like pulling the music together for that, right? Can you tell us about that process?
Yeah, Steven Universe was one of those very lucky accidents to happen to me, because the main composers, Ivy and Surashu, they were I'd been lucky to know them before they both were contracted to do Steven Universe, because I'd been following Ivy for probably since like 2009 and 2010, because I found their work on YouTube and was like, wow, like I like aspire to be like them as a composer. And through various years, we had like communicated on DMs. I was lucky enough to meet them in person in San Francisco, and like a friendship had kind of blossomed through that. So when they told me that they were going to work on Steven Universe, it was like, oh, cool. That's like this Cartoon Network shows. Oh, you know, like Rebecca Sugar, Adventure Time. Cool. Like, we'll see where this goes. But I don't think, at least myself, or I'm not sure if they felt that same way as well, but whether had no idea that it would blow up to be what it is to this day, right? And whilst I look up to Ivy, there was definitely some aspects of our like friendship where we'd have exchanges in musical services, or like just discussions on things that we both didn't know of music, right? Like sometimes Ivy would be really interested in understanding how to improvise or jazz or like get familiar with certain genres. So my first involvement working with her was working with them is through maybe doing some arrangements for like some of the shows where we got Tim to record sax, right? But most of the main involvement I had on a musical point was only through like I did some of the piano recordings on Steven Universe because there was a fortunate period when Ivy was going through rehab with her hands and they weren't able to play. But there was that, and I had a lot more involvement in the Move Me for True Kind of Love. So that was one where I'd helped a little bit of the arrangement, gave a little bit of ideas. And I remember both Ivy and Surashu, they were showing me the track in the States one time that I was visiting them. And they're like, oh, so what are your thoughts in it? And they wanted an opinion on it because I think they were trying to, like, they were focusing on a fairly R&B sound, and they might have mentioned as like, oh yeah, like Chance the Rapper was writing this track, so
Just casually.
Yeah, and I was like, okay, you want my opinion? I play video games, right? But I said a few things, and a couple of months later, they had messaged, hey, would you like to record some things for that track we showed you, get a bit involved? And next minute, like, I did it. I was like, cool, thanks for having me. By this point, I had already done a few recordings for Steven Universe, but that kind of led to the following week, hey, are you free to come to like San Diego Comic-Con to like announce the movie? And I was like,
are you free to come to Comic-Con?
It's like, I'm not, but I am now. Why? so everything kind of just sped up real quickly in terms of being lucky to meet a lot of the people. I got to, meet Rebecca Sugar. I got to meet a lot of the members of the cast, etc., etc. So that was, pretty surreal, because all of this had stemmed from just following Ivy's music on YouTube and SoundCloud, and I'm really blessed to call them like a close friend and someone that I've been able to work with, not just in Steven Universe, but like we always had little, composition little games or things that we tried to do together to push ourselves while we were younger. So yeah, that's kind of how that happened.
I think it's such a cool origin story because, and I want the audio or the listeners of this podcast to have like the context here, right? Because when you look up True Kind of Love, which is the track that you were mentioning that's in the Steven Universe movie, the credits, there's music by Rebecca Sugar, Chance the Rapper, Macy Stewart, Ivy Tran, and Stephen Velma, Estelle, Julian Sanchez, James Fauntleroy. So it's just kind of like it's a long list of people that collaborated on the track, right? But it's more so that like, how does it feel to have your name on a track next to Chance the Rapper, right, or Rebecca Sugar? Like, was that? I know it sounds like it was very natural. It was an exchange of musical talent, and kind of going back and forth on these things, but. Did that change kind of anything with either your career in music, or has it motivated you to do more outside of games? Because this is kind of like, it's almost like the music is almost mainstream, right? And the Steven Universe is a huge show, and Chance the Rapper, for example, probably one of the biggest names there, musically at least, right? Has that experience working on that kind of changed anything post?
I think there's definitely things that have changed as a result of it, but I never wanted that to affect my mentality. I was actually really anxious going on that trip because I didn't want to I'm never really the type of person to make a big deal about anything, and even when that was happening, I was like, I really don't want to post anything on social media because I don't want I don't want anything to change my treatment of others, right? And I understand, sure, you could like bolster or like you can name drop a few people that could definitely help in career. And whenever the time has come, in a natural setting, sure, I can like mention, yes, I think I landed my first game gig because they were the person who was trying to hire me like was asking, oh, what are your biggest influences? And I mentioned a couple of like my favorite composers, Ivy being one of them. And when I said Ivy's name, this game developer, his eyes sparkled because he was like, Steven Universe is like my favorite thing. And then
That's
I was
funny.
like,
oh my god.
Yeah.
and then I was
Never
like,
guess what?
well, like, like surprise. No, so like, yeah, in situations like that, sure, wherever it's appropriate, it's cool to mention. But I wanted to treat that gig as like just another gig, because for extra context for those who may not know, like my main line of work is like, yes, I know I have consoles and I compose, but I'm like a session or performing musician like many days of the week. So
Yeah.
I'll be gigging 5 to 6 times a week already. And even though Comic-Con, sure, it might have been one of the biggest performances of my life in terms of playing in front of 10,000 people, right? I didn't really like, by the time I was on stage, everything felt fine. And it is a surreal feeling, but when you're on stage, like with that many people, like beyond the first 2 rows, you can't really see anyone, right? So it was like, it was a fun and strange experience. But as soon as I came back, I was like, oh, got that wedding gig, like life continued, but life continued. But
that is so funny.
I also truly believe that like any aspect of your work that you may have benefited from at that particular time can come back for you later. So whether that's Steven Universe, whether that's other like accolades I may have claimed over the years, I think like I think the question you asked is like, has your career or has your life changed after it, is like yet to be answered. There's definitely small things. Oh yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no, but maybe as a creative as well, right? Because you talk about Steven Universe, and I'm not terribly well versed with the show, but I know, the way that I assume, and I think I understand how Rebecca Sugar approaches how music is integral to animation, right? Or integral to that show. As a creative, has that kind of maybe fostered an itch to work on projects that are outside of games, like animation or movie, or cinema, or traditional television or whatever have you, that has very integral, I guess, as music as a very integral part of it.
100%. As like, okay, as a personality, I'm the type of person that likes to like dip his hands in every possible jar. So that's like a blessing and a curse, because I feel like sometimes it detracts me from the thing I might focus on. Like, sure, maybe that Consouls arrangement wasn't ambitious because I wanted to make film music today. But
I feel like we can all relate to this, right?
yeah.
Just wanting to do everything.
But like, as a result of isolation in 2020, like I got into a lot of like my own production. So that's another thing that I like, kind of, at least amongst a lot of my musician friends, they would know, but I do produce a lot of like pop and pop jazz, or like derivatives of such, for artists in Sydney, and would love to work with other talented people, not just in the game or anime space, just musicians I might resonate with. So like, yo, Estelle, if you're watching, I don't know if you remember.
Estelle's definitely watching. Definitely watching the Tony M podcast.
Yeah. But like, yeah, who knows? Like, I'm sure someone I may have passed sometime earlier in my career. Like, we never know where our paths may align, whether instead of me playing piano for them, blah, 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 I could be producing, or vice versa. There might be something down the line. But to simply answer your question, yeah, I definitely think that not just the Steven Universe experience, but working on a couple of, whether you even just dial it back and say like, oh, working on a couple of university short films or animations really sparked the interest to like, yo, I think I really want to make music for multimedia, not just game composer. Even though games is what got me in love with the process and music, and that's what really got me into it. I would say my life right now doesn't reflect games like 90% of the time, you know? So there's definitely
Mm-hmm.
all these other avenues that I pursue that ultimately do affect how I make music for games too. Because if I get better at making like pop music or jazz, and it's like, okay, I'm working with vocalists, cool. How can I use that in video games as well? You know,
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot of skills that you acquire by diversifying yourself, and I'm hoping that down the line that can be shown in a lot of video game stuff I work
Mm-hmm.
on in the future.
I mean, I think as we said before, like the video game music space is like a genre that's really undefined. Like you were saying, it's like the only thing that unites them is that they're in video games. And there's like a lot of new titles coming out where music is such a like music is so forward in the approach. Like games like Hi-Fi Rush, which we talked about before, like it's purely just like rock music, and like they're using like actual music. I think there's like Nine Inch Nails and things like that in there. So there's like definitely a more overlap where your experience in producing music in other genres or in other mediums is definitely going to help you along with your
Mm.
video game music career as well, right?
Mm.
Yeah. But speaking of video game music, can you tell us about some of the games you've been working on and the games that are already out? I know one that really caught a lot of attention in the last few months is Bits and Bops. A lot of my journal friends have been writing about it. Everyone's super excited about it. Like, tell us, give us your elevator pitch on Bits and Bops.
Bits and Bops, it's like,
Yes.
it is. I mean, I know a lot of people have made the comparison to Rhythm Heaven, and it's probably the closest thing that many people can gravitate towards. But essentially, it is a collection of fun, boppy rhythm games that will hopefully try to challenge people musically as well. Like, not just, and I know the Rhythm Heaven games did that too, but I almost like, first off, there's a team of three of us: me, Evan, our programmer, and Head and Rose, who does a lot of the animation storyboards and a lot of the quirky humor. Like, I think the aesthetic of the game is really, yeah, like a cute
It's so cute.
bop. A cute bop, like the humor, like there's humor in the music and the animation and the actions, right?
Mhm.
Like a demo's been out on Kickstarter for a few months, and I think it is really entertaining seeing not just like the mechanics of how you're meant to perform, because the engine is very lightning paced. It's very, very accurate when you play it on Windows, at least. But it, like, you will, upon playing it a few times, I think there's many little hidden things you can like appreciate. The humor, like there might be different conditions upon a miss or a hit or a perfect, seeing
Oh
characters
no.
interact seeing characters interact with one another, and just the general splash art of it. But
Mhm.
it has been a lot of fun because it's allowing me to kind of explore, like, okay, I love a lot of like hard EDM, but it's almost delving into like some intense electronic music with a couple of like play school kind of instruments and sounds in the side as
Oh my
well, right?
god. I feel like, I mean, the mascot is like this cute dog, right? And then you just when you were saying like, oh, if you make a mistake, something's gonna happen. I'm like, oh no, what happens to the dog?
Oh no,
Well,
they killed the dog.
They
Oh,
kill the
God.
dog. So one of
We've-
those games
we-
that looks cute on the surface, but underneath it's like layers of like weird shit happening.
we've as a joke, like Rose has always fostered these ideas, because like in these games, like our game isn't too different in the sense that you have the different results conditions, right? You have okay, good, perfect, cool, like blah 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 blah.
Mhm.
This try again, like try again is your like failure, right? But we even had like Rose had already drafted all these like dark failure, conditions of like,
You suck. Terrible.
yeah, but
Awful.
like the boat drowned, and like like, and there was all
Oh
these
my
like
God.
little like art ideas of like,
It like brings a
that's
new
just,
phrase to like,
yeah.
I don't have rhythm to save my life. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So
Mm.
um
Does the
Yeah.
does composing for a game, do you approach composing for a game different than some of your other projects? Because I know this one is very much centered around music, and the whole point of it is that it is a music oriented game, right? Compared to doing score for a video game that is not about music, let's say. But
Yeah.
does your process kind of change, scoring for or doing music for video games versus other projects?
Yeah, definitely. On a technical scale, definitely just from the on a technical surface, like whatever plugins I might use will definitely be catered to the soundscape, because I think one of the important things when you're essentially building a world, right, is like trying to think of the so-called instruments that encompass that world's upbringing, right? So you have that on one element. I also think that when we're trying to create a world that's somewhat fresh and new from the get-go, you try and outsource inspiration from other types of art, right? So sometimes I might look at a lot of like pictures or other games. The fact that your stimulus is already coming from derivatives of that medium, whether it's like looking up graphic artists, animations, or pre-existing games that have the same aesthetic, as opposed to if I'm working on a jazz something, or if I'm working with an original artist, maybe the reference points will just purely be other songs that reflect that point in time, right? And I think if down the line I get to work on a JRPG, there may be other elements of like, looking up poetry or like epics or tales, like trying to outsource
that sense of
inspiration.
adventure.
Yeah, exactly. So it's definitely different to other scopes of work that I do, but the funnest part of like researching is like sometimes just playing games, right? Like you play games, and I was working on this long before anyone, including our team, started comparing the game to Rhythm Heaven. And as a huge disclaimer, I didn't really grow up playing much of Rhythm Heaven. I'd played it here and there, right? But I've never owned a copy. So I think that's a good and bad thing. Well, actually, I treat it more as a good, because like I know I'm not really copying a model, right? Similarly with our artist, she hadn't had as much experience playing Rhythm Heaven herself. It was mainly our programmer who's definitely into just rhythm games, period, right? So and of course, like a lot of the community, rightly so, can compare the game to Rhythm Heaven, and we're not ashamed to say that there's definitely inspiration from there. But I think from the musical and artistic direction, like it isn't it isn't really attached to that stimuli. So sometimes I might play the games like, oh cool, that's how they did it. I wasn't gonna try something like that at all, because maybe my angle of like growing up listening to things like hip hop or other music can seep its way into the rhythm game, and then that will become like, who knows, maybe in future 20 years from now, if like, or 2 years, whatever, if people are making a rhythm game, and then people might make those comments like, oh, this is very Bits and Bops like, like it'd be nice to kind of separate its identity, and of course pay homage to its influence. But I definitely do think that like sometimes my inspiration for making soundtracks may come from games that have no relation to what we're initially trying to achieve. And maybe that's the console's challenging aspect in me, right? not trying to go like,
I think it's like the creative in you, right? Like to explore, like you said, other pieces of inspiration. But I think, when you talk about video games, I think a lot in the industry of video games is you always compare one game to another game. That's almost as if how we operate in this ecosystem, where it's like, oh, it's like a Fire Emblem, but you know what I mean? Or it's like X, but
it's a Hades, like it's a whatever,
exactly.
like that's it's just like an easy way to kind of sell games initially. And I think even in the book world as well, there's a lot of people like, oh, this is like Harry Potter meets Yu-Gi-Oh, that sort of thing. Like I do see like books being referenced like that. And I mean the comparison and stuff, it does come up a lot. Like again, when we were talking about when Hi-Fi Rush came out earlier this year, there was a lot of comparison to No Straight Roads, a Malaysian game, and very similar in aesthetic. And I think that we both saw a video, Arif, like about the devs acknowledging that there might be similarities. But I mean, ultimately, it as long as sort of like uplifts the genre as a whole. Like, we were all saying that there should be more combat games that are rhythm based. It's a different take on rhythm games. Like that's just great in general, right? More variety, better for players. Yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree. But you acknowledge taking inspiration outside of games, right? Is that part of the typical process? I mean, whether it be for Bits and Bobs or other games that you have composed for, is it like one of those things like I gotta play 10 rhythm games to get in the mood and like understand the genre, or is it like I'm gonna go the complete opposite and find some other things? Because I guess the specific question there is like what are the things that have inspired Bits and Bobs or some of the other projects that you've worked on in games?
Yeah, sure. I think if I don't naturally have an idea for a song, and like the creation of a stage may come initially from Evan, who may have a track which is not always rhythm heaven. It could just be a track he likes as a point of reference, or it could be a mechanic, right? It could be like, hey, for this stage I want it to be a call and response. You do this rhythm, the player has to do this rhythm, right? It may start off like that, and if I don't really have a musical creative idea from there, I think one thing that works for me a lot in any kind of musical endeavor is literally to flip the switch. Like, example, if I've played a massive jazz gig, the last thing I want to hear on the car is jazz, right? So if I'm in a creative rut with rhythm games, sometimes rhythm games is not the thing I want to hear, right? I could be flip. It's like, okay, not even gaming music in general. Like, what is something I bop to? Hey, like, who's that dubstep producer, or who's this hip hop producer that I've been listening to? And then sometimes I might be in the car and be like, oh my gosh, that's fire. What is this? Like, repeat, put it on repeat. And then it could be something as simple as like, I'm singing it in my head. Like, it, I'm sure you hear songs, whether it's in games or outside, where like, oh man, this track is really catchy. You start singing it, right? It becomes an earworm. And sometimes by that time I land back in the studio, inadvertently, that's just come out of my hands, right? And it's like, sometimes I'll be like, I'm in a rut with this. What if I just tried and put that into the song, right?
Julian, I'm waiting for like Skrillex's new album has inspired Bits and Bob's track or something like that.
Yeah, no, 100%. Yeah, like there are quite a few Easter eggs in some previous works of like things that I may have quoted from an R&B or a hip hop song. And like sometimes I might have my friends who don't listen to video games at all, and like they hear something that I've worked on, right? And I'll just show them this. Oh yeah, I've been working on this, and we'll be working this, and then they hear something. It's like, wait, that sounds a bit like, and it's not a copy paste, but it's like, oh, that kind of reminds me of like D'Angelo or like a hip hop, Jay Dilla or something. And then I was like, yeah. Like
yeah.
And inversely, sometimes I might have video game friends who are like, who may ask the same question as you, right? And then like, oh, where'd you get the inspiration for this track? And then I'll link them one of my hip hop tracks that I've been like bumping quite a lot, and they'll be like, oh my god, that that does sound like Boomerang or like Bits and Bobs, right? Yeah, like, though I do think like with Bits and Bobs, there's definitely been like, whenever I've worked in it, I've been in a good gaming mindset, where I've been listening to a lot of VGM inspired things. I think other works, like one of the first games I composed for, it was called Kana Quest. It's basically a puzzle game that at the same time teaches you how to read hiragana and katakana. So it's almost like like a Kana simulator meets Bejeweled or something like that, right? And a lot of the scope of that soundtrack had to be, that one was a lot more in the direction of, we want very chilled Japanese inspired melodies and blah 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 blah. So at the time, the first time that I actually made a track for that game, I was luckily enough in Japan, so
of course
that helped a bunch. And yeah, I was just immersed in it. I wanted to buy like a shakuhachi. I wanted to buy all these instruments. I wanted to do everything. But over the scope of the game, sometimes my like musical mental space was somewhere else, right? Maybe for other elements of work, right? I had to form a wedding and do this. And then that working on the game sometimes was a challenge, because that was one of the cases where maybe I had to force myself to draw inspiration from Japanese artists. But thankfully it wasn't just like traditional Japan. They were like the soundtrack kind of scoped as if you went from like 1500 to 2000. So that also meant that I would listen to like J-pop, anime, or city pop, you know, like things like that, where like if I was not able to work on very like Edo period, very traditional styled music for the soundtrack, maybe I can forget track 1. Let's go to track 12 and it's all anime, right?
I was gonna say, like, couldn't you, like, where was the song that was made up of like the Lawson and Family Mart jingles when you walk in, you know, like that's the sound of Japan in 2020, right?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, well, actually that's a good point, because sometimes if I'm inspired anywhere in the world, like phones are really good these days, I can just voice memo so many things, right? And the next time I'm gonna be in Japan in like less than a month, probably I'm gonna be you know, I want to buy like a field recorder, and like anytime I'm around some form of like cityscape or a more rural area, you know, just like whack that on and then just take it back here and just like listen. And there'll probably be, man, there will probably be, you know, you heard it here first, but like there's probably going to be a Japanese inspired stage in Bits and Bops as a result of this trip, right? So
nice.
I love how it'll just be samples of like you said, just jingles that you hear across, whether it be the train jingle or
oh yeah, the train sounds.
Yeah.
Did you know that every train station has a different sound?
A different sound? I had no idea. There's no way that's real.
No, it's real. It is real.
I want to meet the composer who did that.
The composer who composes the train. That is I mean, an amazing magnum opus, right? It's like, I composed the jingles for all the stations around Japan. So I think we're slowly gonna wrap things up and all of that. Like, are there any life updates you wanted to share with us, Arif? Anything that's been happening since the last recording?
You're setting this up as if it's like, yes, I have a child now. You know what I mean? like
break the news to everyone.
Yeah, no. There's no life updates. I think on our side, just really excited to work on some collaborative projects, whether it be, you know, having Jillian, you as a guest on this podcast. You know, we've had some amazing guests over the past couple episodes, 20M, and we will continue to have a couple guests. But for me, I've been playing a lot of Southeast Asian games. So we have Cabaret, that on the date of recording, it is launching today. We just played Troublemaker by Indonesian game studio Gamecom team. And then we have a couple of games coming out in April from Southeast Asia, like Rendezvous from Indonesia and Coffee Talk Chapter 2. So like, I think April is just one of those stacked months. And I know there's a lot of other games coming out too. But that's all. It's just very, very video game oriented, weirdly enough. And then maybe post this call, I'll play some piano tunes. But I know you did something that is very hilariously you, and on a topic that we brought up previously. Where were you this past week?
I was at Evo Japan, which I know, Julian, you're like a big fan of. You're much more in the fighting game scene than I am. Like, I mean, I talked about Tekken just now, and I was like, I play Tekken, but when I got there, I'm like, actually, I don't play Tekken. Like, these people play Tekken. I wasn't even playing the same game. Like, it was my first time, and I think it was Evo Japan, like, coming back after a couple years with the pandemic and all of that, and I wasn't so much I was surprising. Like, I knew it was big, and I knew they would do it very rock style, like, but you get there, and like one entire half of the hall, this is at Tokyo Big Sight, and it's like WrestleMania. Like, they're like announcing, and they do that, and then like a dude comes out and he's like flexing, he's like having fun with the crowd. He just sits down. It's like, all right, Jinbi. He's like setting up his controller. That sort of thing. It's like the funniest thing. But no, I had like two stories to tell from this event, right? Okay, so the first one, Arif had a request from me like a few weeks ago. He really likes Hideo Kojima swag, but doesn't actually play any Hideo Kojima games.
Okay, you don't have to out me on the podcast.
It's relevant to the story, okay? And I think we've outed you 5 times about this at this point. So there's like a GU collab. So GU's like Uniqlo's other brand. There's like they did a collab with Kojima, so they've got these like t-shirts and drip and all that stuff. So Arif was like, oh, like get me one. So I ordered it online and I went to pick it up. And the whole time I've been like telling Arif it's like ugly as shit, right? Like, whatever, I'll buy it because you like it, but I don't approve. When I got there, I was like, actually, let me try it on. So try it on. And I was like, hey, I look really good. Right. So I bought myself one. And I was like, Evo on the day, it was kind of cool. I was like, oh, I'll just wear it. It's a game outfit, going to a game and like, it's cool. I get there, like, you know, like 1 in every 5 people are wearing the same thing.
Of course.
And I was like sweating. I was like, Arif, how do you do this, man? Like, how do you wear much for a game or a person that you've never played that game? I was so terrified someone would come up to me and be like, oh, like you love Metal Gear Solid 2. I'm like, yeah.
Imagine you meet Kojima-san like at Evo or something. He's just walking around.
Everyone, man. And then like, because I think it's like a men's shirt. I just got like a really small size, but like all the dudes were like turning around me, like looking at me. I'm like looking like, yeah, we're not in the same club, okay? We're just 2 people who are here wearing the same shirt. We're not associated. Yeah.
Yeah. What are people wearing at Evo? Because Julian, like, you're a big, from what I understand, like you're also in the fighting game scene. What do people in the fighting game scene wear? Do they look like their characters? Like, is that like? Because like Tekken outfits are like bombastic.
Like if you're like a Jin main, you come out shirtless.
Shirtless,
like
yeah.
Yeah, good question.
I love that. Like, yeah, we'll cut to Julian, our fighting game fashion expert.
I mean, clearly, you know, no, I don't know. I think, to be honest, I don't think that there's always a lot of thought that goes into it, unless, like, at least to the. I mean, of course, if you're talking to a hardcore competitor, like, you know, the best swag is probably the esports team you're repping.
Yeah,
right?
the sponsor, right? The sponsorship.
Yeah, sometimes, I mean, a lot of fans may even get merch of either their favorite player or favorite team, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you definitely will see like a lot of like at least tangentially gamer related things, right? You can just wear Final Fantasy and rock up to Evo and you'll make a friend, right?
Yeah.
Like it's even though it is 100% like a fighting game tournament, if you're repping any form of gamer swag, you'll fit in just fine, I think.
So there were like 2 other fashion observations I made on that day. So there was like a pro player who was visibly, he looked like he was like 12 years old, man. And he was wearing the Gakuran, which is the junior high school jacket, to like emphasize that. And his opening speech was like, yeah, I beat a bunch of uncles yesterday. I'm going to beat uncles today too. It was like the most like badass like speech. And just the fact that he wore his school jacket was just like, look, I'm young and I'm here to dominate. It was like really, really
yeah.
This sounds like an anime within itself.
It sounds like an anime character, right? Then the second one, which is less fashion and more about hygiene. Like I was really worried that I would go there and it would smell really bad. And I told because one of my friends was working there and he was like, and I was like, hey, like smells fine here. You told me that hygiene can be a thing at these events. He was like, oh, like yesterday when it was like public, there were like heaps more people and it would just be like 1 or 2 individuals that you'd be like, I'm not going to stand right next to them right now. But like on the day I went, which was on the Sunday, it was like a media / like you had to buy tickets day, whereas the other days were free. So there were much less people. So it was fine. Didn't have to bring any deodorant or anything like
Hey, it's sweaty out there, all right? The combos are very challenging to nail.
Yeah, exactly.
But you said did I get this correct? You participated in a Tekken 2 competition. Like you texted this to me.
Yeah.
But you said I'm going to save this story for the podcast or something along the lines. Is that correct? Like Rino from the 20M podcast competed in a Tekken 2 tournament at Evo Japan. So like what is that?
I was walking around with so I was there as press and I was with my photographer and we were just walking around. So it's split into 2 sides. So there's the stage and the tournaments, all the finals happening there. And then on this side is like just the games you can try, which is a lot smaller on that Sunday because there were less consumers. But there was like Street Fighter 6 and then there was like Puzzle Battle, you know, the little dinosaurs that shoot the bubbles and then
Puzzle
they
Bubble?
get 3 and then
No.
Yeah, Puzzle Bubble. Yeah, Puzzle Bubble. Yeah, they were there for some reason. So there were all these like other smaller booths, right? And then I saw Tekken 2. I was like, oh, okay, like I want to play, you know, for nostalgia. And then the guy from the booth comes up to me and he's like talking to me and he's like saying stuff. It's, you know, like in the same sense that like when someone approaches you, it's like, hey, you want to sign up for this credit card? That kind of vibe. And like behind him was my friend Ken, who is working at Evo. And we had just texted to say, oh, let's meet up. And he was looking at me in a way that seemed like, you know, he probably had to run soon. So I was trying to hurry up this conversation with the booth guy while knowing that my friend is over there and I can talk to him. And the booth guy is like, blah, blah, Japanese, 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 Japanese. And I just sign here. And I'm like, in my back of my mind, I'm just like, that's weird that I have to pre-register to play like this 20-year-old game. But like, okay. And I wrote my name and I just went off. And I'm like, and I'm like, hey, it's nice to meet you. And he's like, hey, I see you just signed up for the Tekken 2 competition. I was like, what? I was like, so I thought I just signed up to play. He's like, no, he's asking you to join the mini taikai, like the small tournament. And then like I had a ticket, like the ticket I thought was to come back and play at this time. It was a ticket for when the tournament started, and it's like you have to come back between 11:45 and 12 p.m. I was like, what?
Right.
And he's like, oh, you can cancel if you don't want to. I was like, whatever. Like, I'm going to be here till this time. I need something to do. So I turned up, and obviously I was the only girl there. And I got a bit nervous because in my mind, I was like, I'm probably going to be bad. Like anyone who's at Evo Japan on like the last day is not just your casual player, right? I'm probably going to like absolutely strike out. And I was like, but my goal is like, I need to win at least one round, because I don't want people to think I'm bad because I'm a girl. Like I'm bad because it's me. It has nothing to do with like, being a girl. So that was kind of like my goal. And then like from the beginning, it was like such a bad start. Like you do jankenpon, which is like rock, paper, scissors, to see who gets player 1 or player 2. And like I don't know what you do in Australia, but in Malaysia, you go like scissors, paper, stone, and then you drop your answer, right? So in Japan, they do saishobu jankenpon, but no one sings it, because there's like a universal understanding amongst all Japanese people how the rhythm goes. So I was like trying to do it, and I would just like drop before he drops, and they're all like looking at me like, what's wrong with you?
It's like you're playing a rhythm game as like before your Tekken tournament. Pretty much.
Yeah, I'm like, dude,
bad.
pretty much. And so the organizer ended up having to sing it so that I could like know when the pawn was.
So did you win?
No, I lost. I got player 2. I got player 2. The guy got player 1. And then we go, and he is who he play. I played as martial law, because Hwarang's not in Tekken 2, and martial law is the closest approximation to forest law. And I won. So I won against a guy. I won until the semifinals, and then this other person came. Yeah, with an Armor King, and just smashed me. Like, I think I got 1 perfect against him the first round, and after that he was like, done. Like, I'm not holding back against this person. He just destroyed me from there on. But yeah, that was my Tekken
I can't
2.
believe we always revolve around the same topics. We talk about Digimon, we talk about Kingdom Hearts, and then we've talked about Tekken so many times. So I'm so glad you participate. Like, the main takeaway here is that you are a competitive Tekken 2 player at like, that has competed at Evo Japan. Like,
but I can't play
so
rock,
funny.
paper, scissors.
Yeah, but you can't play rock.
So has any like esport organizations, flooded your DMs yet, or?
Yeah. Any of them watching this podcast, like I'm free. I'm available for all signings.
Specifically Tekken 2.
Yeah. Tekken 2 only.
That's too funny. I'm so proud of you.
Thank you.
Hold on.
All right. Well, before we wrap things up, thank you so much, Julian, for your time. Where can the folks find you and find out about your work?
So if you search Zorsy-san, now here, wait, quick little thing. People think it's like, Zorsy-san, is he trying to be Japanese? Double meaning. My last name is Sanchez, so take it as you will.
Nice.
Haha. So anyway, if you search Zorsy-san on all the socials, it should be there. And then, of course, if you're interested in the Consouls or Bits and Bops, both of those names should come up. Consouls is spelt with soul, S-O-U-L-S. So C-O-N-S-O-U-L-S. The Consouls band. You'll find us on YouTube, Spotify, all the like. And Bits and Bops is Tempo Lab Games on Twitter. But yeah, if you just search Bits and Bops, all of those will pop up. Thank you for your support, and thank you both for having me on the podcast.
Thank you for your time. And we'll make sure to drop all the links in the description down below anyway, so people can find you. Yeah, it's awesome. Yay. Any last words, Arif?
No. It's gonna. This episode has definitely inspired me to play more music again, and for me, I think it's just so cool that we've been able to explore, topics on this podcast that range from development of video games to like more on the ecosystem building side and the publishing-ish side to people that are involved in like music, which is to me one of my favorite parts of the entire medium. So this was such a cool episode to record. But also, I'm really happy because we recently dropped the episode with Sophie talking about developing indie games on a little bit more of the producer project manager editor side. So that episode is live right now. So go click on that video. You know what I mean?
Yeah, go check it out. Sophie's awesome.
That's it.
That's it. No, that's where you cut. That's
I don't know. I think I'm gonna leave that in because like that Sophie's just gonna be watching and it's like okay, and like, that's the only thing
we can't hyper every single episode like a 20 second.
We're gonna do
long
the same
hyper.
thing for Julian next episode.